Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, I just want to let you know I'm just going to have the one in-depth video today. I've got to get down to the conference center pretty early this morning and present. I'm actually in Coralville, Iowa, and I got to drive through this pretty massive winter storm yesterday. Now, a couple of comments about this winter storm. As it took shape right here over Illinois and Indiana, there were several long-standing barometers at National Weather Service observing stations that actually broke their all-time lowest pressure. So this was a very deep low-pressure system, and that was the cause for the very, very strong winds. Before this even got to this point in the Midwest, though, I want to point out that in the previous days, as this began to gather strength, it actually produced a pretty sizable dust storm that came out of parts of New Mexico into Texas as well. I was looking at some satellite imagery of that last night. You can see, though, as the sun was setting last night here, that the snow on the back side of this, you can kind of see it moving, or excuse me, not moving underneath the cloud cover. It does stretch from the four corner states clear into a broad swath here of the central part of the United States. Now, the next system is already kind of taking shape, and unfortunately, this next system is going to produce a similar severe weather threat over parts of the south and southeast, which saw a lot of severe weather last night. That was something we had to watch very carefully in the overnight hours as the system wrapped up. But I just want to make a quick comment about the snow. I think I drove through where some of the deepest snow was. Very thankful that someone a long time ago figured out the differential on a car and figured out how to give them two so that we can have all-wheel drive. But right in through here, where there's 15, 16 inches of snow in this part of Iowa, I was amazed that if you've never been through here on I-80, there's a truck stop. I know a lot of you that are listening know what I'm talking about. It's the world's largest truck stop. And if you've ever been there, it's a huge gas station as well. And I was the only vehicle getting gas. I've gotten gas there 100 times. And most of I-80 was just cleared out. So a lot of folks are making the decision to not get on the roads, which was a very wise decision overall. Well, I bring all this up and talk about this area because it's going to get hit again with this next system that's coming through, and so is the south. But if we just take a look at that snowfall, now this is just through 6 p.m. last night. So there's a lot of places farther to the east that added more out of this, but pretty broad swath here of at least 6 inches of snow in the last 72 hours, many places picking up well over a foot. When you combine that with the winds, there was quite a bit of considerable drifting. And I took just a whole dash cam video of my trip from Champaign to Coralville, which is just outside of Iowa City, and just to watch the event. And thankfully, just safely driving, taking my time. But the plow crews are out. They're working hard on those roads. Greatly appreciate what our departments of transportation do in order to make it safer when driving. Now, I understand parts of I-80 were shut down farther to the west, and it was pretty rough go here with much stronger winds in the blizzard conditions, that were back in the plains. But this is just a quick look at your last 72 hours of snowfall. And that's not to ignore what's coming into the northwest, which again, we've got blizzard warnings that continue being issued by the National Weather Service out of Seattle, and we're expecting a whole lot more snow. I'll get to that in a few seconds in the Sierra Nevada. So I'm very excited next week to be examining the snow water equivalent data from the western United States to see how much these next couple of systems improve that. But it's doing so in pretty sizable helpings. Now, as I mentioned, the severe weather threat will continue in parts of the southeast, and this is just a look back at yesterday's severe storm reports. 350 in total, another 15 tornado reports, very strong straight line winds. And I just want to take note, we actually had non-thunderstorm severe wind reports that came off of Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and then in the Snake River Valley, where we had the high wind watches and warnings and all of that. They also updated the previous day's reports. So I just want to show you this for completeness here. We're now up to 85 reports and 10 tornadoes. So this is already starting off in 2024 as a very busy tornado year, just based on this system and the one that is about to follow it. Okay, from here, how about total rainfall? This is from the MRMS data set. And I want to point out again just how much moisture this pulled out of the Gulf of Mexico. And we combine that with flooding due to snowmelt here in parts of New England. But there were places in through here that picked up 3 to 5 plus inches of rainfall. Now, the Mississippi Basin is yet to respond to this. I would like to show you the latest data I've got for it. As of last night, it was about 2 feet below low stage still. But I imagine this is going to change considerably. We can already see that the top 10 centimeters or 4 inches of soil moisture has seen some corrective action on its drainage basin here. And you're saying, well, you just showed me a whole bunch of moisture coming into this area. Why still dark? Well, this is all snow, so this is not soaked into the soil just yet. But a lot of this started off as rain in this area, and that's what's improved that. Now, our flooding threat remains here, and we can also see the higher soil moisture values pushing up toward the Red River of the North. But parts of Montana continue to get drier in the forecast, which is not good. And we've also seen some drier conditions moving into western Texas as well. Now, if you go down to the root zone numbers, and I don't know if they let the intern flick the switch to turn the county layer on, because it makes a messy map here, so I apologize for that. So I'll have to see if NASA corrects that for tomorrow. But they used a dashed line, and it makes it very difficult to see. It looks very fuzzy. But this is still our ongoing issue around the Mississippi Basin, that the subsurface soil moisture is still quite inadequate, and that needs to be worked on. So I have a bit of a conflict with these forecasts in the way they're delivering moisture, because this is just me personally. I live right out here outside of Champaign, Illinois. We continue to be well into the warm sector. A lot of places in Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and then south keep staying in the warm sector of each of these systems. And the conflict is this. I want it to get cold. I'd like to see some snow at least once in winter. And with each system not having enough, again, what I call antecedent cold air, that means cold air before the system gets there, we've not been able to drop the snow line. So a lot of it's been falling as rain with snow on the backside. We've not frozen those soils over yet to kind of let the snow stick. So what are we looking at as we go forward? Well, there's still another 2 systems, possibly more, that are lined up. And they're expected to enter into parts of Oregon and California, move over the Rocky Mountains. And then it's kind of like we've been doing, right? That kind of checkmark view of their path in the broader sense. So we still have more moisture coming into the Mississippi Basin, more into New England, continuing the flood issues, and severe weather down here farther to the south. So I know you're seeing drier conditions down here across the south, but there will be, another 2-day event coming up. I'll show you the timing of that in a second. Moisture does finally get into Southern California into next week, okay, out there in week 2. But overall, the southern storm track doesn't really set up until we get into week 2. I'll talk more about the northern plains and the Canadian prairie in just a few moments. So this is where our all hazards weather map is this morning, about 5:40 Central Time. Still the wind issues here to the east. We have the flood watches and warnings, winter storm warning up into parts of Maine. Thankfully, the severe weather threat is out. But behind it, we've already got winter storm watches and advisories out in place in the plains for system number 2. And you can see the extensive area of winter storm warning here throughout the Pacific Northwest. We have wind chill advisories, freeze watches and warnings down south, strong winds, blizzard warnings. It's just, this map's going to stay colorful for several more days here. And the setup looks something like this. Okay, here's our next wave that's coming through. That one's going to dig in and give us our next chance. But the fact that there's this kind of ridge of high pressure here with the subtropical jet on top of it meeting up with the polar jet, it's just giving us an issue with dipping these snows down farther and farther to the south. Now, there's a lot of you listening like, thank goodness, I don't want it. But it's just something I think about for winter, because snow is part of the hydrologic system that can slowly in some areas help the recovery of soil moisture. So I watch it. And don't forget, we do have our third and final one here from the series we've been talking about, still stacked up out in the Pacific Ocean. So given all of that, I want to just address the issue. Over the last 15 days, there's just been too much mild air ahead of each one of these systems. And if you just want to think about this generically, the more mild air you have to the north, the farther to the north the storm track has to go. And I'm just putting check marks on here to give you an idea. So if we would have built in at the end of December cold air into this area, we would see a lot of these storm systems dipping really far to the south. Like these, you probably heard them discussed before, like these Miller A, Miller B type systems. I talked a lot about them preseason. But instead, we've had more of what we call the panhandle hookers. They start here, hook a little south, and then run right through the Ohio River Valley. What this pattern has not given us are these northern plains setups where they come out of Wyoming. They draw a lot of moisture on the backside like this, and then hammer, Montana, the southern Canadian prairie, the northern plains. In fact, we discussed kind of jokingly yesterday, but North Dakota with the previous system was the only state without a weather advisory earlier this week. So this is, I think, the setup issue with this particular pattern. So given that, I just want to point out that by Thursday, when the next one's going, there is cold air coming in on the backside, but just look how mild things are out ahead of this. So what that's doing is it's pushing that rain-snow line farther to the north, and this is important, without cold air rapidly undercutting this next system, we don't have a big freezing rain threat out of this system. All right, so there is a positive to it in terms of the damages that freezing rain can do. And I think I've told you this in the past, of all of the types of weather that exist, at least where I live in the Midwest, I fear freezing rain the most. And the reason for that is it's a very slow and destructive type of weather. Yeah, tornadoes are terrible. Hailstorms are terrible. Derechos, yes. But you can often have a winter storm that produces ice that can cover much more geographical area than any of those three things. And then it's just slow destruction of property, and you can't travel. It locks you down. You have the risk of getting trees. I mean, it's a terrible setup. So anyway, sorry for that little diversion here. But again, we just have a lot of mild air out ahead of this. So as you watch the newest forecast of the European ensemble on where low pressure will be, one system exits, that's one we've been dealing with. There is a slight pressure trough in here, so there's a front bringing in some snow. Going to get some more snow into parts of Iowa out of this, and even up here along the Red River Valley of the north. But our next low, the big one we're going to talk about, comes out of the panhandles again by Thursday afternoon. So there it is. Now, if you watch, the European ensemble opens this up and takes that low. Remember how I told you, they hook a little to the south, and then they start to roll in this direction. I want to make a point that there's still a large spread only 60 hours out on where that low pressure system is going to be. And I'm only looking at one model. This is the European ensemble. If I included the GFS, the ICON, if I included all of them and multiple runs, you'd see that the spread is still significant with this, which is a bit of an oddity. Usually the models have got it really honed in tight. But as you go out there, this is where that low is expected to go. Now, if you watched my analysis yesterday, I told you that that second low of the three we're watching was going to come out and go a little bit farther to the south. And that's why we saw the heaviest snows coming into this corridor. Well, the one change that we get out of this is you move that oval I just drew there north and west. If this low instead comes out and goes like this, then all of a sudden you shift the heaviest snow to the north with it. And so the newest storm tracks basically take this from maybe St. Louis to Paducah to Evansville, southern Illinois, now into central Indiana. And it's going to be a deep low. This might, again, challenge some of those low pressure records, some of which were just broken yesterday. And it goes from there into Michigan and eventually crosses the eastern Great Lakes and shows up into parts of Ontario and Quebec. And it's going to be producing some huge snows on the northern side. Now, with this high pressure behind it by the weekend, this is the one that's going to start to drop in the brutally cold air. It's going to start on Thursday and just really progress farther and farther to the south. And the next low that follows it isn't really a low like we talked about. It's basically just going to follow the leading edge of this really cold air with high pressure. And that's what's going to give us that overrunning threat finally to talk about the risk for some ice. And I'll get more into that in just a few seconds here. But that's just kind of a look at your next 5 days or so out of this pattern. We'll get deeper into this in a few moments. So the severe weather threat, this is the day 2 map, which means it's valid on the 11th. With that next system coming through, we've already seen from eastern Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. This is where we're concerned about the storms. And then into day 3, it's almost the same area that was just hit hard yesterday that has another broad area of enhanced risk. So please be very weather aware in this area. I mean, you just saw nearly 400 reports of severe weather damage yesterday, and we're about to get hit in this area again. All right, so it's time to kind of dig into the models. We're going to begin with the high-res NAM. Picking this up this morning about 10 o'clock in the forecast hour. So one system leaves. The second remember that pressure trough I showed you comes in, so some light snow this afternoon to this evening coming out of Nebraska into Iowa, all the way up here in the southern parts of Canada. But as I played through that, take a look at the northwest. Very intense snow, very heavy snow coming through. It's going to be spreading, and you can almost see the frontal boundary sweeping through here. That's part of that really cold air that's going to help this next system set up. But the cold air, remember, is all behind it. Don't have a lot out ahead of it. So where are we? This is Thursday morning around 10 a.m. You can already see the recovery, see it right here, of the moisture. Watch go back and forth, and you can see the pull on that Gulf moisture and that unstable air. This is now Thursday night, and so this is where we're going to keep an eye out for the risk of that severe weather. And already the snow begins to form from the panhandles through parts of central Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and getting into Iowa. Now playing this forward, remember how the models were taking that low from here a little bit farther to the north. You can now see that broader area of rain again spreading over where just last night we finally brought in some snow to this region. But Iowa, for the most part, will be in the coldest sector, getting another round of snow out of this throughout the overnight hours Thursday into early Friday morning. Rain out ahead of it, but notice, look how small the area here is of getting some ice. Very important to see that. So the overnight hours, severe weather threat to the south Thursday night and Friday morning. And as we play this out through midday Friday, which is as far as the high-res NAM goes, you can see here kind of where the threat of some of the heaviest precipitation is going to be. Okay, that's kind of the setup. And remember, here's our third push with the cold air finally coming in behind it. So I want to take you over to our multi-model comparison. Again, I love to do this, GFS versus the Euro. As we played out, there's system number 1 leaving. Here's system number 2 taking shape. So if we just kind of pick it up where the NAM left off, you can see the GFS on the left putting down some bigger snows in parts of Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, northern Missouri. Europeans mostly into parts of Nebraska here. Then we play it forward. Again, look at how much farther to the north the rain is expected to make it now. That's going to be a very challenging forecast. I'm going to tell you something. This could bust in a big way. And if that low, if it just dips a little bit farther to the south and runs over the Ohio River Valley, take that rain snow line and shift it south. But if it doesn't, it's going to stay right where it is. And the wetter conditions, are going to move farther to the north. Who gets the heaviest snow out of this? I think it's going to be this corridor that's going to set up right on the edge, which is going to hammer the Chicagoland area pretty hard come Friday into Saturday. Take a look at this. That's Friday night, the conversion over to snow. We'll take a look at the snowfall amounts in just a moment. So our severe weather threat, again, moves Thursday into Friday, just shifts along the south. And then we see this system, again, curling up right over the eastern Great Lakes, getting into Ontario and Quebec, and exiting. Now, the models have finally come into a little bit better agreement on system number 3 here, coming into the northwest, another big snowmaker. But the differences are still there. GFS is farther to the north, the Europeans farther to the south. Can you see it? Look at Washington in the 2 models here, just by Saturday. And as this plays forward, that low comes out, but notice how much higher the pressure is coming in here. So very strong winds continue. We're going to see the high pressure building in, and this is going to set up with some snow farther to the south. But this is an overrunning setup. So this isn't low pressure and cold air curling around the backside of it. We call it the trowel, the trough of warm air aloft that sets that up. We're not going to see that. So you get this mix of snow to ice to rain. And as that happens with this overrunning setup, we could be spreading snow through parts of the Mid-South finally with all that cold air. And then it really gets going as it rolls up the East Coast in the European model. I've got to save more of that analysis for later. You're going to see the model run now, but I want you to know that the models do not agree. Take a look. This is next Tuesday, and I've got a deep low in the Euro. The GFS has already yanked this thing clear past, it's up here in northern Quebec. That's about 7 days out in this forecast. And we've looked at the precipitation anomalies. We know what's coming. I'll show you the probabilities in a second. But I do want to do a quick multi-model analysis, west versus east. And I'm going to start off with Germany's ICON model. Now, as I mentioned, we were expecting the biggest snows in the country to be in the Cascades, and that's still the case. But heavier snows are expected to roll through a big section of the Northwest into this part of the Central Rockies. You can also see what we're looking at in terms of totals in the next 7 days out of Nebraska, Kansas with this system. And remember, this is all a 10-to-1 ratio, which that ratio may not be the wisest. I'm looking for the snow swaths. You can also see some coming up here in North Dakota, coming out of the Canadian Prairie as well. Sierra Nevadas get a good dose too. So with that as a setup, can we switch models now? Let's go to the European model. We've got this is the 6Z that just came in, but I want to show you longer, so I got to go out to the 0Z. Let's play this out there. There we go. I see a lot of similarities between the two forecast centers in total snowfall amount. And I'm curious where the GFS is on this. If we look at that, I'll just go ahead and use the 6Z because it's fully in. And again, we've got some good similarities overall in the snow. Let's switch from here and look at the other side of the country. So how about we go east? We'll stay on the 6Z run. Again, right in through this swath here, it's going to be cold enough just to keep those bigger snowfall amounts in place. So notice we're going to be adding right where we just got 8 to 15 inches of snow, quite a bit more right in this area. Again, this is coming in with system number 2, Friday into Saturday. This is going to probably shut down O'Hare. I've already changed my flight plans for next week because of it. And look at this. It goes right through Michigan into parts of Ontario, hitting the eastern Great Lakes. And remember, system number 3, which is included in this forecast, is what brings the snow down here into parts of the Mid-South and the Delta. That is the GFS. Let's now flip it back to the European model. Let's kind of go in the reverse order. I want to go back to the 0Z run to capture system number 3. There we go. Again, kind of a similar setup, a little bit lower snowfall amounts right in through here. Again, that's where the most challenging aspect of this is going to be, that rain-snow transition right in through this area. And then for completeness, let's go to Germany's icon model. And let's go back to the 0Z run so I can get you all the way out there to the end of it. I see a lot of similarities between Germany's icon and the European model, which is run out of Italy. So very potent forecast still on its way. How about some other information on the ice? The risk continues to be down here, and I think it will stretch farther to the east with time. But this is next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday that I'm worried about that. Monday here, Tuesday, Wednesday. Keep an eye out on it. Now, that's not to ignore the ice threat that's possibly here. I just don't know if this has been forecast properly. So early next week, I will watch for this to see how this all sets up. This weekend, I'll watch for it. Next, how about some probability on snowfall? This is the chance in the next 10 days of 3 inches. Let's step it up to 6. And let's go ahead on up there to 12 inches. So that's going to be our next swath right in through here. And of course the western mountains, which are ridiculous. I mean, parts of the Cascades, another 24 to 48 inches of snow here. From there, how about the wet and dry side of this? The dry side first. Again, because the flow is taking systems like this, we leave a pretty decent shadow coming off the Rocky Mountains with this. And that's why much of the plains, the western plains, the high plains, are not picking up the big moisture out of this setup. So this is the probability of less than a ½ inch. This is the probability of more than an inch. This is the probability of more than 2 inches. So mostly here in the west, because we just kind of squeezed out all that moisture yesterday from this system, but there's quite a bit of moisture still left in the second and third systems we're monitoring. Now, by the time we get to day 10, the jet stream's back to its old antics, right? We talked about this yesterday. It's going to give you a different view. It's going to extend again from parts of Africa through India, coming out of Southeast Asia, Japan, and get all the way across the Pacific before it busts up. So what happens is we go back into this configuration, and you've seen me draw that many times in the month of December. So does this flood in some mild air? Yes. Does this give us northwest flow again to ruin the chances for moisture? Yes, it will. So part of week 2 will be drier in a big section of the middle part of the country. But I noticed in the longer range models that when we get out there a little farther, the jet begins to pull back again. And if it pulls back here again, that split happens a little bit farther out in the open ocean, which can give us flow that comes back in and makes the turn, giving us a more active time period once again as we get toward the end of the month. Now, I'm waiting on doing a little bit more of an in-depth dive into the longer range forecast based on some stuff I shared with you earlier in the week. So I'm not going to update that at this point, but I want to point out that I think that our government, the CPC, has probably got the best handle on how the end of week 2 begins to increase activity here. And it will be important to see if we can finally deliver some moisture into Montana. I'm going to be watching that very carefully in this area. Not going to be a complaint in this region to go back over a little bit drier for a while, okay? But we'll be watching this whole western setup pretty carefully here. All right, one of the big moving factors that is a bit of a mess in the forecast models is that when you look at the phase diagram, you see the MJO sweeping out of phase 2, 3, and coming out in 4, 5, and 6. Now, these are traditionally more mild phases, with the colder phases being over here for North America. But I'll be honest, you got to actually look at the Hofmuller diagrams. And again, if you're kind of new to my videos, this is today, and this is going through the next 15 days. And what we're doing is we're looking at this geographical area, and the blue-green means rising motion. This shade of color here, these warmer colors, mean sinking. And what I see is I kind of see a corridor of rising motion over the next 15 days, getting it back to phase 8-1. And on Monday, I told you phase 8-1 is something where if it does get back over here, it starts to crank up systems again, which means later this month, maybe that last week, is a bit more active again. The other component of this is if you watch where the sinking motion is heading, it's heading here toward Brazil, meaning they're going to go back over into a drier week or so. But what I want to know is if this continues, does this get late January, early February wet again for Brazil? We'll talk about that again in a second and its implications. First, temperatures though. If you look, we are expecting to get some pretty cold air pretty far to the south. Almost the entirety of the lower 48 is expecting frost, and we expect to get those sub-freezing temperatures at some point even down into central Florida. The temperature pattern, I'm going to show you the low temperatures today. This is, again, so not highs, but this is low temperature compared to average. There's this morning's lows getting into tomorrow. See the warm air? This is what's out ahead of this. But it is much colder. Watch Montana. That's Friday morning. This is Saturday morning, minus 30. We're off my color bar in terms of difference from normal, which means this is 40 degrees colder than normal or more. And that cold air continues to sink into the central U.S. by Sunday and Monday, where low temperatures will be struggling to get out of the negative teens. So some brutally cold air is going to come in with this. And the big question is, how long does it last? Because it really just brings the epicenter of that cold air right to Missouri. It's going to continue to finish farther into the south. And it looks something like this. That's the next 5 days compared to average. So more than 20 degrees colder than average over a 5-day stretch here. This is day 5 through 10. That's when we really get the full extent of that cold air. But by day 10 through 15, remember, the jets all lined out here and mild air begins to flood into the west. And we just wonder if that'll start to set an expiration date on the cold that's in the central United States and bring it back closer to average. So again, we'll kind of revisit this and take a better look at the longer range in my last few videos of this week, but I'm going to stop right here in terms of U.S. weather. And I want to show you some stuff going on in Argentina specifically. Now, we've spent a tremendous amount of time talking about Brazil, but I want to comment a bit on how Argentina's really turned the corner with their drought. And in some places, they've had way too much rain. If you look back over the last month, coming out of Buenos Aires into the southern growing areas, this is some near record wet. And there's been some flooding problems that have happened up here along the Paraná River, which rolls right in through here and exits, like goes through Rosario and then out just north of Buenos Aires here. And my point behind telling you that is I mentioned yesterday in Cordoba, which is a major growing area, that they had a few thunderstorm clusters over the weekend that dropped 10 inches of rain and more. But we have broken the long-standing drought here. And the forecast models want to keep it very wet in that area over the next 10 days. There's a stalled out frontal boundary. Now, as the MJO slides, through those unfavorable positions for rainfall to the north, we see drier signals. It's not that there's no rain, but there's drier signals, especially east. But my big story is after all the rain that just came through here, my concern is this. This is the new European weeklies. This means we're going to look at a sliding 1-week window out for the next 45 days. And here comes the drier air as the MJO slides. Remember, I'll just show you this again really quickly here. Where did I put that dumb thing? There it is. See that? That's the drier air coming into week 2. Here's what it looks like. Wet conditions stay south and they stay over parts of Argentina. But then what we notice is by the end of January, very wet conditions start to build in here. And this is the time period over which harvest of soybeans ramps up, safrinha planting ramps up. And if it's too wet, it keeps things green too long, especially for that late planted part of the crop or the replanted part of the crop. And we're looking at the potential production delays, not production delays, but planting delays because of this. And that's top of mind for me right now in South America. How wet does it stay at the end of January into the beginning of February, possibly shifting that crop calendar around? Okay, appreciate another bit of your time this morning. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Thanks.